Divine night. Divine night, blessed be. Papa Lucifer Samdi, co-therapist, spiritual life coach. And I wanted to make that introduction. I've been on Instagram. Not Instagram. Sorry. Been on Facebook, been on TikTok for a while. I've been 3 years in the public practice of shadow work, getting into the aspects of shadow work therapy, working and dealing with your shadow. And I wanted to make that formal introduction to you guys. Throughout the next, every Wednesday, I'm thinking about it. We're going to do it every Wednesday, depending on how this goes. We're going to do something called shadow sessions. As a therapist, as a holistic therapist, spiritual life coach, one of the things that I deeply get into is the aspects of getting into your shadow work. Understanding that everything, I'm going to do this to the plain, simple. Everything has a shadow. Let's say it like that. Everything has a shadow. Everything that you're doing is aspects of thinking about your emotions, your emotional intelligence. Things like use an example. We think about financial literacy. What is it a byproduct of? Emotional intelligence. Everything down here is ran basically off your emotions. Everything down here is basically ran off of your emotions. It runs based on your emotions. So if we're inside of that space, thinking about everything runs off, like basically understanding our emotions, and we come into this space from an unhealed space, childhood trauma, sexual trauma, all of these aspects of these traumas are something that I call the unresolved. It's your unresolved that creates your space. It's your unresolved that creates your space. You're creating from the unresolved. You're creating from the 90% of everything that you're creating is coming from the aspects of that unresolved. Your subconscious mind. Your subconscious mind records everything is true. So if I have the unresolved of my traumas, then I'm not dealing with these aspects. These are what I'm projecting from. But before we get deep into that, we're going to be getting into, going to give a nice little breakdown, full introduction about what I do, the services that I provide, the things that I do. And then this is where we're going to start doing this we're going to try to do this every Wednesday around the same time, build it up, because a lot of times we don't understand really what mental health is. Understanding our mental health, understanding our emotional health. We think about our self-care routines. We think about, oh my God, I got to get my self-care routine. And we think about everything that's external. We think about all the external things. We think about, I got to make sure I go to work. Got to make sure I take care of the kids. Got to make sure that I can get in a relationship. Got to make sure I can do all of these things. I'm going to say this because I've said it before. If you're familiar with my videos that I've posted, everything is connected or has a shadow. Everything has a dark aspect. Everything is connected to your shadow. Everything that you're dealing with, everything that you think that the world is knocking you down, and everything that's going against you, everything that's fucking you think that's fucking you up, it's connected to your shadow. The negative aspects, let's do it and start with that. The negative aspects that you have rejected, that is what's inside of you. That's what your shadow represents. That's what your shadow represents. If you're not familiar with shadow work, that's the aspects of your shadow. Everything in the aspect. Everything inside of your shadow. So think about it like this. When we're talking about a trauma, we're going to start with a trauma bond. Think about a trauma bond. While you were 5 years old, think about some shit that happened to you when you were 5 years old. Whether it was the first time you got told no, or the divorce, or sexual trauma. We're going to get real. We're going to be getting very, very deep into these subjects because we have to make these normal in order to heal. Sexual trauma. Something happened to you when you were 5 years old that was a traumatic experience. That was your first experience. That traumatic experience happened when you were 5 years old. Let's use 5 years old as an example. That goes unchecked. Whether you tried to have a conversation, you tried to explain it to your parent, tried to explain it to your caregiver, whatever it was, that goes unchecked. That shit goes unchecked. Now, let's say you just keep going. Now you 8 years old. Something happens when you're 8 years old. Same event happens while you're 8 years old. Same event happens when you're 11 years old. Same event keeps the events that are similar to this event have created this development with yourself. You only learn your emotional development is now stuck as a 5-year-old. When I break this down to when I'm talking to my clients and I'm doing consultations and I help them understand that you can be 34 years old, 35 years old, in your 40s, in your 50s, it don't matter what age you could be. But I can guarantee if you were 34 and you have unresolved issues that you're not dealing with, you're 34 going on 5. That event is still fresh for you because it's within inside of your shadow. It's the negative aspects. And when we break this down into more into the spiritual aspect, the negative aspect is your feminine aspect. That's the receptive aspect. So based on what you received or how you perceived it and created this perception, this layer of behaviors with yourself, now you're stuck within that 5. Now, basically, when it boils down, you're looking at the world. You've been looking at the world for the last 15, 20 years through the eyes of a 5-year-old. You've been looking through the eyes of that unresolved trauma until you resolve it. You're looking through the eyes of that 8-year-old. You're taking on the 8-year-old behavior. You're taking on that 11-year-old behavior. And this is why, if you're not familiar, when I always say healing is destructive, you're deserving, but you're not entitled, and stepping into the aspects of this darkness, if you're not familiar with that aspect of yourself, you're not familiar with that aspect, you still have reservations about that aspect. You don't know how to perhaps you don't know how to have that conversation. Perhaps you sitting there with yourself and you're like, my mom, but how am I going to heal when my mother doesn't want to accept or tell the story? How am I going to heal when everybody in my family is still coveting or still trying to hide that factor that my uncle did this to me? How am I going to start my healing process when I can't do this? When this, and this? You're reacting as the 3-year-old. You're reacting as that 8-year-old. You're reacting as you're still trying to receive the attention that you didn't receive at that age. You're stuck within that emotional development. You're stuck within that stunted emotional development. This is the aspects when we talk about healing the inner child. So when we go through this healing process, there's the healing of the inner child. That's the development and the emotion. That's the emotional development, the cognitive functions, all of that in the aspect of the inner child. Then we come into this state of the adolescent phase. The adolescent phase talk about in that human perspective, we talk about your preteens. That means when you're 12, 13, 14, 15, 12 through 18. That's your adolescent phase. That's when you're finding yourself. But think about this. You're finding yourself based on the development of those emotions and those behaviors. You're finding yourself based on the development of those emotions and those behaviors. So now you're creating patterns based on the emotions and the behaviors. You're creating your pattern in your first identities. And the first steps of your identities are going to be based on those emotions and those behaviors. The things that were said to you. The things that were said to you. The things that were done to you. The things that you heard. The things that you they said you didn't understand. Every time that your mom was sitting there, every time, especially when we talk about in the Black community, the things that When you get grown, you'll be able to do this. All of that is what's creating those patterns and those behaviors. And then you turn 18. If you make it from 15 to 18 and not have kids or anything of that nature, but if you were 12 years old, 13 years old, and you experienced childhood pregnancy, or you were taking care of your brothers and sisters while you were younger, all of these aspects are now imprints into what you believe becomes adulthood. This is all the things that you look at that become the aspects of your adulthood. One of the truest factors. Appreciate it, brother. One of the truest aspects of the factors of the healing process of your I'm grown, I'm an adult. We have to be real honest. From the traumatic experiences, we're nothing more than a hyper-adolescent. You're nothing more than a hyper-adolescent. When we think about the term hyper-vigilance, hyper-masculine, hyper-feminine, hyper-masculine, hyper-vigilant, hyper-awareness, this is the aspect of living within the extremes. You're not present. You're living in the extremes. That means you're in a constant state with yourself that I'm either in the past or I'm always thinking of how my future is going to go. You're not in the current state of now. This is where your shadow is. Your shadow sits, when we use this visualization, your shadow becomes that middle point or this absolute point from where all of this is going to stream. So if my mindset is being a 5-year-old, 8-year-old, let's say I'm being an 8-year-old. Let me use myself as an example. I remember when I was 8 years old, going through the aspects of the first experiences of learning myself or learning the reality of myself it came to the first argument that my parents had in front of me. And I remember the first fight and it happened. I remember the first fight happened in front of me. I'm 8 years old. I don't know what to do. I'm scared. I want to defend my mother. I don't know what to do. That went unchecked. When I went to my mother and asked her, she said she was okay. When I went to try to go to my pops tried to explain it to me. But that became that first imprint. So the way that I've learned how to conversate in that point, something that simple that we don't really think about, that's inside of our shadow, we try to block out. That's me now. I'm going to be looking through the eyes of the 8-year-old. So now when I'm thinking about protection, manhood, when I'm looking at the images that are talking about being a man, when I'm looking at the images that are talking about manhood, being a man, being a protector, being a provider, I only have one example. I only had one set of examples. And if that negative example was a negative aspect, then my mind as an 8-year-old developed, the mind of an 8-year-old being developed, still in that developmental stage, I'm going to rationalize that moment because I wasn't taught emotional intelligence. I wasn't given any type of emotional intelligence. I don't know the roots of it. So now I'm looking at everything as an 8-year-old. So think about that. Me sitting there as an 8-year-old, going through life as an 8-year-old. Yeah, I turned 9. Yeah, I turned 10. Yeah, I turned 11. But that's going unchecked. That's now in my subconscious mind. That is now recorded as that's what it is. That's what it is when somebody doesn't do this. But I haven't resolved it. It has not been resolved. So as long as that's imprinted, as long as that program's inside of my subconscious mind, not to mention the stuff that happened between 1 to up till that point, not to mention the aspects of any traumatic experiences that I came through in the womb. This is when we get into the aspects of womb healing. Every time that I think about this, now I'm sitting there. That's now my behavior. This is an unresolved aspect or my unresolved behavior. So now I'm acting out based on this. Because what I saw, now I'm going to implement. I'm implementing that imprint. So now let me get to my age 18. Now I'm 18. Now the entire time since I was 18, what else did I hear? When you're grown, you understand, you got to pay bills. All of these things are on top of that 8-year-old developmental point based on that argument talking about money. Because the argument was about money. So my first instance, let's go to age, when I was age 10, my first experience, I'm out there, I'm cutting grass and doing things of that nature. Now I made money. Now in my mind, that's still present. It's still replaying in my subconscious. It's still playing inside of my mindset. This mind is underdeveloped. It's still developing. So the first experience, I get money taken from me. I don't know how to react to this. I react to it in anger because I saw anger. I react to it in anger. Oh my God, you took some money from me. Now I'm hurt. I'm now experiencing this aspect of this emotion for the first fucking time. I only know one way to react by the example. So I react in that fashion. I get in trouble. I feel shame. I feel guilt. Because now this is my first instance of, but wait, you did it. But I said it through anger. You did it. So my response was in anger. Now I'm shut back down. This is another layer when we talk about the aspects that now that shit got shut down. So now I feel shame for standing up for myself. I stood up for myself. I feel shame for standing up for myself. So now that's now an imprint based on through the eyes of an 8-year-old. So now I go from 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, something else happens. But these things are not happening by coincidence. Just when we start understanding the aspects of that mental imprint. These things aren't happening from coincidence. These things are when we're talking about when you're programming your space. When we come into the aspects, when people first come into people first come into their awareness and first come into this, okay, cool, I can manifest and I can manifest this and I can do this and do this. You got some groundwork to do. Because the only thing, this is what I always tell all my clients when I'm always talking about in lectures and lives. You only can program your space based on your unresolved. You only can pull things into your space that are in the cadence or in the rhythm with your unresolved. So let's say you want to pull in money into your life. You're talking about, I want to pull money into my life. When you first start sitting there talking about you want to pull money into your life, and then let's say you sit there and you listen to a money mantra for 21 days, and all you thinking about is money, you have to ask yourself a question. What defines money? Remember, it's a byproduct of emotion. Emotional literacy is financial literacy. So without me having emotional intelligence, if my emotional intelligence, I don't know what it is or it's low, let's say my emotional intelligence is within aspects of shame. It's in an aspect of shame. My emotional intelligence is in the aspects of shame. So I define money by shameful. I define money in the root of shame. So now I must define where I first learned shame. If I didn't define that, then I'm looking when I get my first job and the first job my boss yells at me, or I perceive that my boss yelled at me. Oh my God, my boss yelled at me, said I wasn't shit. I'm adding words to this shit because my emotional ear is all fucked up. Oh my God, my boss said I wasn't shit, or I was late, now I feel bad. I'm feeling the same shame. This when we come into emotional intelligence. One of the biggest keys about emotional intelligence is emotions do not come. You can be right now. I use an example. Let's use an example. Gas prices then went up to $6, $7, $8, $9, $10 a gallon. You can be upset that gas prices went up $8, $9, $10 a gallon, wherever. But you're not really upset that gas prices went up. You have to be, this is when we're talking about being honest with yourself. Because you may be, but you have to get to the root of it. Look at your gas tank. You never filled your gas tank up. You kept it at half. You were putting $10 in there, $4 in there, $5 a gallon. You were putting little amounts of money in there to take it up to half. So what you're really upset with is the system that you use based on survival is no longer working to your benefit. See, that system is no longer working to your benefit. That little $10 ain't going to work because you haven't created that system or that structure for that new emotion to experience that new emotion based on that manifestation. This is how the manifestation works. I have people come to me all the time like, yo, I've been doing this for like 3 weeks and 4 weeks and weeks at a time and weeks at a time. My shit ain't seeming to work. It ain't popping off. It ain't doing something. I'm like, it's working. It's working. You said you were great. You said you were fucking awesome. You said you were the best. You said you loved yourself. What came up first? What came up first? All the doubts about you loving yourself. All the shame in you loving yourself. People telling you that, oh, you acting real different right now. All the times, every time that you wouldn't put on that, every time you went and got fresh, put on that outfit, every time that you got your hair done, you got a fresh haircut, and if somebody told you, man, you think you full of yourself, all that shame came up. But it didn't come from there. That's just the precursor. That's just the precursor. That's the trigger. That's what we call the trigger. It's triggering you. But the emotional aspect is not coming from that point. So when we go into this aspect of this healing process, when you're sitting down with me in sessions with me, we have to go beyond that point. See, the trigger point, that's this is what I call the infatuation. You were infatuated with everybody because your inner child is now infatuated with the attention that you received. Your inner child got the attention from that moment. They were excited. Hell yeah, I got it. They noticed me though. And your ego is going to protect you just like it did when you were 5, just like it did when you were 8. And it's going to protect you. And then you're like, yeah, man, but they're just haters. But it really hit you. It really hurt you. It really hurt. You have to sit with that emotion. So when we think about that manifestation and that pops up, let's go into the aspects of that money I was talking about. 21 days goes by and you're trying to manifest money. Guarantee what comes up in the first couple of days is them bills. Those bills, the way that you're spending your money, how you spend, everything gonna come up and trigger you. Somebody gonna say, let's go to a party. Somebody gonna say, yo, we going out of town. Somebody gonna say, hey, the car fucked up and you had to go put your car in the shop. Everything will come up and it's going to stop you from taking yourself off of the focus of making that money or manifesting that money into your space. But in reality, this is where you must be honest with yourself. You knew that before you said you were trying to manifest money for your rent. You knew at the 30th of last month that your rent was $950, $750, whatever your rent is. You knew exactly how much your rent was. You knew exactly how much your rent was at that point in time. You knew exactly how much your rent was. But you wanted to wait until the middle of the month to start, okay, cool, I'm going to go get me some money oil, get me this ritual started, and I'm going to get this money up. Why didn't you start back then? Because let me give you this let me show you how this shit works and how the shadow's behind everything. The first of the month, the 30th of last month, you finally made it. You made it. You got the money for the rent. You paid all the bills. You made it through the month. You made it through the week. You made it through the month. But at no point in time, because all of that's now behind you, all of the negative shit that happened, All of this stuff behind you, when it comes back up, when you set that tone, I'm setting a new tone, you got to create the new atmosphere. So now day one come up. How are you programming the space? This is where we talk about programming your space, setting clear intentions, programming your space. How are you programming your space? You're saying that you want to make a certain amount of money. Here's the thing about you manifesting and bringing things into your space. That thought that you had, that intention that you wanted to set, you simply having that thought lets you know that there is a paradigm or a parallel where that comes from. That parallel or that projection is coming through the aspects of your darkness. It's coming through your darkness. And if you have the unresolved aspects of your shadow and you still have shame on the table, you'll feel ashamed. You start feeling anxiety and shame. Man, I don't think I can make that much money. I don't think I can make that much money. My job don't pay me that much. My job don't pay me enough. And what are your bills? The first day, like you want to remember, you're reprogramming your day. That means you got to sit there inside of that darkness as you setting that intention. So if I defined money by way of shame, if I define money by way of my insecurity, if I define money by way of my inadequacy, if I'm triggered by seeing other people with money and they doing less work than me, that means it's triggering my jealousy or my lack mentality. So I have to check that first. That's where my money is. That's where my emotional energy is. I'm putting all of my energy into that. So naturally, when I project down into the space, even if I do get the money and it's 50-50 chance, I want people to be jealous of me. The moment that I celebrate it, yeah, I got the bag, I got that new job, and now everybody around me's all dry. Everybody around me all dry when I say I got the money. How am I going to react? Like the 8-year-old? Like the 8-year-old? Still, finally the 8-year-old's going to stand up for himself. I'm going to use that emotional point to stand up for myself. I'm going to project shame on the others. I'm going to project my shame into the space on the others. I'm going to project my guilt on the others. I'm going to try to guilt trip people. I'm going to put people in a position to where I can feed off of it. I can feed on that. Because now that gives me the charge for my manifestation. So now I don't have to go the rest of the days. All I need is that. That's what you've been doing most of your life. When we come into the aspects of our traumatic experiences that we experience, as long as that trauma is still present, as long as you haven't went through the process of really looking at and having that aspect of sitting down and having that conversation with your mother or whoever hurt you at that point in time. And every time that it comes up, you get upset all over again. It's because you're living inside of that loop. You're living inside of that space. So you upset, but because you're upset at this, because it's unresolved, you need that aspect in your life. So you need a conduit to make you feel shame. You need that conduit inside of your space that makes you feel inadequate. You need that conduit inside of your space that makes you feel jealousy. You need those aspects inside of your life. That's what you keep telling yourself. That's what you keep telling yourself. That's what you keep bonding on because it comes into your conversations like this. Yeah, I've been through a whole lot of bad shit in my life. And you keep telling that same story. I'm just telling my story. I'm just telling the truth about my life. The aspects of the truth reflects the bias of the person. You can have facts to your truth about the aspects of the person, about you. So you can make anything true based on the factors that is based on your trauma. But honesty creates accountability. Honesty creates accountability. Honesty requires accountability. I've said this in videos before. Think about it like this. Where you don't want to take accountability in your life, you naturally are going to create a responsibility or something to be responsible for it. So let's go to that aspect of your trauma. Because your mother, your father figure, mother figure, whoever it was, because your mother did what she did, because your mother did what she did, now you believe that she was not a good mother. What are you going to do in reflection and opposition to that? To avoid the shadow in that state of that hyper-adolescence. Everything that she said on the underline from when you're grown, you can do whatever. When you pay bills in my house, you can do whatever. Doop, went down the damn line. You were lying about your uncle. You were lying about my boyfriend. You were lying, whatever it may have been. Trauma connects to lack. Now you stay in the lack aspect of yourself. Now you're lacking. Now you're stuck within when you're in the traumatic space, it's of lack. So now you're looking at your mother and your mother's sitting there and you're like, my mother should have did this, and this. My mother didn't teach me shit. My mother didn't do this, and this. So now okay, cool. So now you created an image of your mother. You created a totem of your mother. So when we get into the spiritual aspect of that, and we talk about people want to like altars, you building altars, and you deified your mother as the bestower of your traumatic experience, the bestower of your pain. You deified your mother. So she's the deity. And now every time you go to her, it must be in the response to keep her thriving as that aspect. But here it goes deeper. So now everything that let's use an example. Let's say your father left your mom's. You and your mom split. Before all of that time, you were hearing all these arguments with your mother and your mom and your pops. You were talking about, you need to clean up, you need to do more of this around the house and this, and that. Your mom yells at you and tells you to clean up the house. Take care of your brothers and sisters. Things of that nature. The things that we coined as normal. Now, you develop this emotional complex in that behavior. This is now your new behavior. This is now your new behavior. Your new pattern. Clean up, get something. So now, let's go deep. We don't get deep. So now your dad leaves. Your dad leaves. The only reason that you can rationalize with is because the house wasn't clean enough. Your mom didn't clean the house. Your mom didn't do something. So you automatically now rationalize this inside of your mind. This now becomes an imprint inside of your shadow. You don't know the real story. You just said your dad left. You telling yourself that your dad left. So that relationship's now estranged. Your mom gets a new boyfriend. Your mom is talking to other guys, new boyfriends, and all of these things. These new men start coming into her life. Becoming a substitute instead of that space. Your mom tells you to respect him like you used to do, your dad. This motherfucker's hitting on you. You try to tell your mother that. You try to tell your mom that he's hitting on me. He's beating on me when you're not here. Your mother, because let's freeze it there. Your mother, in her traumatic experience, already had her traumatic experiences. Remember how I talked about, if you didn't come into the lot earlier, I was talking about this state of hyper-adolescence or staying in the extremes. Your mother came into that space based on planning her future. Most of us go into this state of planning our future, making the best of us. or the thought process of, I'm going to give my kids what I didn't have, or things of that nature to make them try to fit within our narrative. Already a negative connotation, shame, guilt, doubt, all of that's in there. So now you're sitting inside of that space with that. Now that's sitting there. So your mom created this space that's based on doubt, guilt, insecurity. Your pops broke away for whatever reason. You find out later, she keeps telling you that your pops left and all of these things. But in reality, later on down the line, you hear that story, but we don't get to that. So now you're sitting inside of that space. This new man's in the picture, hitting on you. Your mom's not believing him. Your mom's putting this man over you. This mom's putting this man over you. From the masculine aspect, as a man, you see this happening. You see this. This creates that imprint. Now inside of your mindset, you'll say to yourself, I would never put nothing over anybody that I love. I don't put anything over what I love. This is one of the imprints that's going to cycle into that space. This is how you start bonding. Because that imprint is now there. That's how you see the world. So you can't wait to share. You can't wait to share. So now you can't wait to share this aspect, but you still have that shame going on. So you learn to hide and mask this. But you only can implement from what you came from, whether it's in direct or it's in opposition to it. So now you're inside of your space looking for what you're lacking from your mother. You're looking for what you lacked from your mother. She put another man before you. You don't know where your father is or where your father even went. You don't know the full story. So all you have is the truth that's of that space. All you have is the truth of what you've seen. The story that your dad left, your mom married got this new, all these dudes in the house. She kept putting them before you. So every time that you tell your story, you're telling your truth from your perception. This is where we get into the honesty of the perspective. Or it could have been in the feminine aspect. And it get real. We don't get deeper. As we get deeper into these sessions, we don't get deeper into certain aspects of this. Or into the feminine aspect. Your mother, same scenario, same dude come in. She catering to this dude. She catering to this guy. You catering. So what you now learn, in order for me to receive attention, I got to cater to this guy. No matter what they are. No matter what they're doing, I have to cater to this energy. So now you catering to it. So now you learn that that's your new truth. That is your truth. The only fact that you have is that every time that it goes wrong or every time that it's triggered, you recondition it because you're not sitting inside of that space because you don't understand how to sit inside of that space. This is how we create these factors of these trauma bonds. And then you built the entire world is feeding you based on that consumption. So now all you ever see is, now here's the thing of how you attract this shit into your life. Now you sitting inside of your space and you watching all types of shows, everybody around you, you despise the two-parent household, the people that are in two parents inside of a household, you seeing this shit on TV, you fighting, you going back and forth inside of this narrative because it doesn't sit with your truth. But that honesty is inside of that darkness. That honesty is inside of that negative aspect. So now you grow up. You 18. You're grown. You're 18. You're grown. It gets even deeper if you had a child and you had a child during this point in time. So let's say you have a child when you was 15. So now you're the adult. So now everything that you went through, the shame that you felt, whatever you felt during that moment in time, now you living that out. But you never leave past the point of hyper adolescence. Most of us, through the traumatic imprints, we're in a state of hyper adolescence. It's why we consume the way we consume. It's the reason you looking at the things, the way you look at things, the way you take in information. is due to a state of hyperadolescence, living in the extremes, avoiding that dark point, avoiding that darkness. You can sit there. It's a difference between me telling the truth of I went through a bunch of shit when I was younger. I went through a bunch of hurt and pains and traumatic events and put on the street and getting in fights when I was younger. But if I sit there, if I don't know how to sit there, I gotta learn to sit there. This is where I always say it's not your fault. The event's not your fault, but how you respond to it is. The event's not your fault, but how you respond to that event is. How you respond to what happened to you is. That's where you take your accountability. At a point in time with yourself, the reason that it becomes so hard to heal is because because we get stuck in the human perspective and we'll say, I'm an adult. I'm 30 years old. I'm 40 years old. I'm 50 years old. I'm 60 years old. It's like the same equivalent to when someone says, I've been doing this for 40 years. Ain't nothing happened to me yet. It's the same thing when you think about eating food. You ever eating some bullshit ass fucking food and it's not hurting me. Just because I'm not dying or my body's not reacting to it externally doesn't mean I'm not reacting to it internally. And we get deeper when we get deeper into these sessions, everything that you consume is based on that. The way that you making your money, the way that you see yourself inside of a relationship, the way that tone is set, the tone being we don't get deep into this. Yeah, we don't get deeper into this. The aspects of the tone that's being set, that's your traumas. Your trauma sets your tone. That unresolved, that unhealed sets your tone. The atmosphere that was built around your traumas, survival, lack, over-sexualized, sexual trauma, all of these aspects, those are the tones set by that atmosphere. You learn to thrive and survive in an atmosphere. This is what keeps us in that state of hyperadolescence. Because you learn to thrive in that atmosphere. This is why when you start going through the healing process, if you check in with me and we start going through your consultation, going through that healing process, after most of the times when I take on new clients, after the consultation, it is a very big ego death. Because once everything comes out for the first time, you can't push it back down. Because I create the space where you ain't going to push it back down. You can't push something back into the shadow if you're standing in front of the shadow. I work inside of that space. You can't push nothing back down because there's nowhere to push it back down to. We're inside of your shadow. We're inside of your energy. You've done it unconsciously for fucking years. You've done it for years. You just deposited or emotion. We get this when we're going to get into emotional dumping. You emotionally dumped your shit in the shit for years. You dumped it all into your job. You dumped it all, real as shit. You dumped it into your kids. You just keep dumping it off. But at a point in time, that shit ain't working no more. That shit didn't work anymore for me. Dropping it into work. Because that's when I started like, damn, nigga, what are these bonds that I'm creating? Why aren't they lasting? It was the trauma. The trauma set my tone. So then I had to take accountability for that. Because when you start realizing that your trauma, one, that it was your traumas. Two, you understand that, damn, I've been 5 years old for the last 15, 20 years of my life. A lot of that shit's very, very heavy, ain't it? I'm 5. What do you mean I'm 5 years old? You're 5 years old emotionally. You're 8 years old. You're probably 8 years old mentally. Your psyche is probably no more than 16. When we go into the psyche, the identity, and then the ego itself. Your ego ain't nothing but probably 16. You rationalize everything that good happened to you at 16 during this when we look at these monumental moments. When you turn 16, back in the day, you were able to drive. When you turn 18, you were able to go to college. You turn 21. So you got used to, and you programmed inside of the space, you programmed your own reasoning behind these moments. So every time, but in that reality, then this when it goes into the other reality of that trigger, someone can say, man, I turned 16, I got my first car, but you triggered still because your first car was a baby. But you got to be honest with that. You got to be honest with that aspect with yourself. See, when we're not working in the aspects of this honesty, we're only going to keep creating what we've been creating. Only going to keep doing what you've been doing. You can sit here and say every single day of the fucking week, I'm going to get to it. I'm going to get myself in order. I'm going to check my, I'm going to tell you this right now. And this is coming from the 15 years of my healing process and still ongoing healing, going to the aspects of for the last 5 years, building and getting myself set up for being a practitioner and being a therapist and a healer in that aspect. That's cool. I ain't never seen it before. And then sitting in there, I was like, you only create from your unresolved. That means you got that unresolved mom wound, and you know your mom, you trying to prove to your mother that you can do it better than her. Ultimately, you trying to prove to your pops, the pops that you never had, that you can be a pops, and you don't keep using that, it'll become your same excuse. Where you are not willing to dive in and learn yourself, you are creating external responsibility to give you the validation that you desire. That validation. But that validation is not more than aspects of that projection. Stuck with yourself, lost with yourself, going through the shit you're going through with yourself. All because you keep telling yourself that, yo, when I get this, I'm going to do this. When this happens, then I'll do this. And you don't even realize when you want to get really real with it, same thing your mom said. Same thing your pop said. Same thing family members said all up and down the timeline on your family members said. That's why now you getting triggered every time. That's why when you getting triggered because you started your new business and no one's supporting you, why did you start your business in the first place? Because I wanted to get financially stable. I wanted to work for myself. Okay. So financial freedom, financial security. But what's the byproduct? What is financial security the byproduct of? What is your emotion? What is your emotional, your financial security a byproduct of? How do you define money? How do you define your house? How do you define the things that you're bringing into you? How do you define these aspects in your life? Man, I'm 30 years old, and I should be doing this, and this. One of my favorite things that says, what have you created as the system for that? To actually say that you're supposed to be there. All of that's found inside of your shadow. Your shadow is literally just dealing with the aspects of your ego. Because after you get past the shadow, then you really got to go dive into the aspects of your darkness. The roots to your shadows. The roots to your shadows. The shadow is all of the results that you cast to the side. The shadow is all of the results and everything that you cast to the side that you didn't agree with because it didn't fit that identity. You haven't created that structure yet, that system. That's the reason you don't get support. I understood that. It was like, I'm doing something in the aspects of me doing what I do with the aspects of therapy, doing these therapy, providing these services, and the aspects of us really dealing with our aspects of ourselves. That was unheard of and unseen of in both sides of my family, on both sides of the family line, 7 generations back, 7 generations on both sides of my family. It was unheard of. So me sitting inside of this space, everything that had to happen for me to get to this point, it helped me understand, like, I'm not going to get the support. I have to learn that relationship with myself. It's always been the relationship with me that sets my tone with everybody else. The relationship with myself sets the tone so I can thrive in a higher level of atmosphere. If I came from a chaotic space, my tones were based under a chaotic sense. So if I get anything into my space, it has to match that tone or it doesn't exist. So now when I'm looking at relationships, the friendships, the jobs, everything in my environment was simply a catalyst to the tones that I was setting, that I wasn't dealing with, that you're avoiding. I'm trying to escape. So it became reality. The reason that I wanted to get the job, the same reason put it like this, the same reason I was like the same reason earlier on when I was trying to start companies and do business of that nature was the same reason that I got the job. It was escape. So the same reason I got the job was the same reason I got in a relationship. It was based on escape. What was I trying to escape? My beginnings, not dealing with those traumatic experiences, not dealing with the fights that I heard, not dealing with the stuff that was in my shadow. So I stayed in a stream of escape. So that traumatic pressure, we'll get deeper into that next week, that traumatic pressure is what I've been thriving in. That traumatic pressure is what I've been thriving in. That's what sets my tone inside of my space, that traumatic pressure. And I'm living in that. I'm existing in that. I'm working in that. And you work in that for so long, you don't even smell it anymore. You've rationalized everything that happened in your life, brought you to here. But in the reality, have you really sat with it and you're sitting with that aspect and you're like, you know what? I have been going through this for this amount of time because I haven't forgiven my mother. I haven't forgiven my father. I haven't forgiven these people for these elements and actions that happened in my life. So in my current relationships and friendships, where I find it hard to forgive people, hard to accept apologies, hard for me to even apologize, hard for me even to thank people, hard for me to take people's information as I need to take it. Where is this coming from? It's never been them. It's always been an aspect of me. When people want to go and talk about toxic relationships, and oh my God, I'm tired of toxic people and narcissists, and I'm tired of people sucking up my energy and draining me. Got to be honest with yourself. The only way something can attach is if it's already present. The only way something can attach to me is when it's already present. The only way something can bond to me is when it's already present. And if I look at the wound, rejection, abandonment, avoiding, all of these different wounds, guilt wounds that are left open because they're of my past. Every time somebody puts me under, guilts me. Every time I find myself guilting someone, the same way I was guilting others was the same people would guilt trip me. Where did I learn guilt from? The same reason that I'm had such a fear of rejection. I had such a fear of rejection that by nature, I'm sitting here rejecting things. I'm rejecting that job. I'm rejecting this, but I don't know why I'm rejecting it. Because in my shadow, in that same instance of where I would not understand my mother, in the same instance that was being groomed within inside of me, the fear. This is where we look at the adolescent aspect, get to that inner child, but then I got to get to that womb work, working on the womb. So that womb, how was that womb created? What's the history of my mother? What's the history of my pops? What's the history of my parents as separate and together? Both of my parents never met, my mother never met her pops, and my father never met his mother. So now I look at the root. Now I just found the root in the womb, how that womb was created. So now I can look at that aspect in my inner child while my environment was that way. So now that I'm understanding how this environment was developed and how I survived in that environment, now when I move forward to this aspect of my adolescence, my behaviors and my patterns, they start making a lot more sense. I'm now being honest about these, taking accountability for these things. I'm now acknowledging, I'm now accepting these aspects. And as I start noticing these aspects, and now I'm coming out of this state of being hyper with myself, this hyper vigilant mentality, this hyper aware mentality, I'm able to slow down. Now I'm sitting in that space. Now I'm sitting in that shadow. Now I'm sitting in the present. Now I'm sitting in the now. Now I'm going through this process. Now I'm actually, now instead of me, now I'm sitting in that space of being vulnerable with myself. Now that I'm vulnerable, my consciousness now opens up. Now I can go into my subconscious. Now I can start to reinstill the programs. Now I understand, damn, that was the root. My fear of rejection was the root to my money, the root to why I didn't want money. I didn't feel like I deserved, or I didn't feel like I was worthy enough of making that much money or being inside of that space or speaking like that. And all of those aspects are what created that identity. So I created an identity that was broken, mad, angry, in the streets, banging, fighting, doing all types of wild shit. But in reality, I was hurt. So now I go back and look at all the things that I did. 90% of the shit that I was doing because I was hurt. So that means 90% of my interactions, relationships, the tone was based on me being hurt. Their tone was in reacting to them being hurt. So the atmosphere of that pressure made that happen. So it made that relationship that bond. I had never seen healthiness before. So now I created that bond on that dynamic. There's multiple ways that we create these bonds. That infatuation. We don't get deeper into these aspects. We don't get deeper into these aspects throughout as we start doing more of these shadow sessions. This is the first time. First, I wanted to make a formal introduction on TikTok. I done my videos on Facebook. I've done it on Instagram. My YouTube channel, Gotta Co-Alchemist. Facebook page, Gotta Co-Alchemist LLC. And I wanted to come on. I wanted to like give that formal on here. Every Wednesday, I'm feeling like Wednesdays is a good day. Wednesday, the way that I program Wednesday is the example of, in order for me to win the day or embrace this win and move forward, I got to understand the night before. So Wednesday around 8 o'clock going to be pretty good. I want you to understand something. This healing process is destructive because you must face these aspects and deal with these aspects. You can't keep building off of the trauma. You are deserving, but you're not entitled. This goes to the aspects of you are deserving of everything that you fucking desire. But you got to get out of the extremes of entitlement, which is the excessive need and the excessive want. Living in that state of that hyper state. Wanting shit to happen so fucking fast because you ain't present in the present state. And this honesty, we get honest, that's going to force you to sit down with yourself and take accountability. There's nothing out here. It's based on a reflection of what you need to consume in order to keep that trauma going. I desire you to be the fucking best. Next week, Next week, we're going to get a little bit deeper. This was the first one I wanted to do. I wanted to put it out in the space. What I do, I'm a co-therapist. Means I deal heavily with the aspects of shadow work, the spiritual warfare, the internal conflicts, aspects of that, spiritual life coach. To book a session with me, you can hit me up in the inbox. You can hit me in the DM. Book a consultation with me. Consultation with me is a shadow work consultation. It's a psychoanalysis. We do it via video. I'm gonna let you know now. It's 2 hours. What we pull out is when you're coming to me, you're not gonna put it back in. Not only am I listening to your story, I'm reading your body language. I'm reading your energy. I'm psychoanalyzing you. We're bringing it all to the surface. It's time to put in that work. Other services that I provide, I do readings. I also do natal chart analysis, human design charts, and I do a whole slew of other services. Hit me up in the DM. Next week, I might do a couple of live. I might do some readings live. I might do readings live. So y'all stay tuned for that. But I desire you to be the fucking best. It's time to step into that transparency and be honest with yourself. It's time to stop putting yourself in that position that you're a victim. It's time to step out of that victim and that lack mentality. Everything that's going on around you is happening for you, not to you. You have to learn how to tap into that honesty to understand how this shit works for you. Every time that you fucking wake up, you have some options on the table. Them options are going to set those fucking conditions. If you don't like your conditions, you got to go sit with how you created those conditions. When it comes through the process of, are you reconditioning your environment, or are you relearning your environment? That relearning your environment, that's based on how to think. That reconditioning of your environment is that what to think. I can't find the why inside of the what. I only can find that inside of the how. How my life became this way. Why and what cycles do I have to break and get honest with myself to take it to the next level? To break that shit down, to get myself to become better. I got to be honest with myself first. Once again, I'm Papa Lucifer Samdi, your co-therapist, your shadow shaman, your spiritual life coach. This is the first installment of the shadow sessions here at 8 o'clock p.m. So y'all look for it, 8 o'clock p.m. Any other videos and any other content from me, you can go to my YouTube channel, Godico Alchemist, G capital G dot capital O dot capital D dot OCCULT Alchemist, ALKHEMIST LLC. Type it in for your YouTube and get tuned in. Yeah. I desire you to be the fucking best. Because I desire myself to become the fucking best. I don't know how the lives work on TikTok, like if it replays or whatever, but if it doesn't, I'll download it and I'll chop it up. We do it in whatchamacallit. But I desire you to be the fucking best. I love you. We love us. Ashe. You end it.